Hey, welcome to another week of Divine Direction Life Groups. I want to say a special thank you to all of you that are hosting groups, and I've heard so many amazing stories about how God is directing you. We make our plans, but the Lord directs our steps, divine direction. This week we talked about faith to start, and we looked at the story of Nehemiah. He had a massive divine burden. He wanted to help rebuild the walls. And a lot of times people think, well, he wanted to rebuild the walls and then boom, the walls were rebuilt. But we need to recognize the power of just having the faith to start. We talked about the reality that for so many people, it's the start that stops them. It's the unwillingness to take the first step that actually keeps them from finishing what God would want them to do. And the truth is that you never finish something that you don't start. What I'd love to do, just to get the discussion flowing, is let's go around the room and answer the question, what is something that God is calling you to start? Is there a discipline? Is there a habit? Is there something you need to start over? What is it that God is calling you to start? Let's pause and go around the room and talk about it. What is God calling you to start? Well, hopefully all of you were able to describe something that you believe that God is calling you to start. For example, in the message, I talked about the leaders training. For years, I've thought about doing an event where we bring together leaders and just pour into them and try to equip and empower leaders to do even more to make a difference for God in this world. And for years, it's only been a thought. Well, I decided to go ahead and start. And one of the first things I did was to say, this is what we're going to do. One of the next things that I need to do is to name a date, to decide how many people do we target. Is it 20? Is it 2,000? I need to think about, is it 2 hours? Is it all day long? But anyway, as I go through this, we took a step, which is to go public with it. Now I've got to take another step. What I need to do is to find what is the next step. For me, it's going to be targeting the date. Then we're going to need to define the event and so on. As you've talked about, here's what I need to start. What I want you to do is now define the next step. I love the verse from Zechariah 4:10 that says, "Do not despise the day of small beginnings, because the Lord rejoices to see them begin." The Lord rejoices over the very first step that you take. So we're going to start small and take the next step. God's calling you to start something. Now the next question is this: what is your next step? Go around the room. Let's keep it simple. Don't try to plan the whole thing out. You can't predict what is coming, but just define very clearly, if God's calling you to start something, what is the very next step? All right, as we dive into the third question, I want to go ahead and give it to you. Then we're going to talk for a moment, and I'm going to give it to you again, but I want to set up the question. And we've covered 4 weeks of divine direction. Hopefully you're reading the book too and getting direction from God as well. But I want to ask you this question: what is the biggest takeaway that God has given you from the 4 weeks? What is the number one biggest takeaway? And let's review the big thoughts from 4 different weeks. Week number 1, God cares about the who before the do. When you're becoming the right who, God will lead you to the right do. God cares about the why before the what. When you're living for the right why, you'll better discern the right what. Motives matter to God. Week number 2, we want to know what to do. What do we do? The truth is, God gives you the wisdom to decide. We walk with the wise and we become wise. Whenever we seek God, He gives us wisdom. The good news is God will advise us, God will guide us, and God will watch over us. If you remember the image of me teaching my son to ride his bike, I want to know what to do. God gives you wisdom to decide. Week number 3, we talked about trusting God's process. What do we see? There's the Spirit's prompting, Deo Honuma. There's certain uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen. There's predictable resistance. Don't worry when you face opposition for serving God. Worry when there isn't any opposition. And finally, there's uncommon confidence. What do we have? We've got the Spirit's prompting, certain uncertainty, predictable resistance, and uncommon confidence. Week number 4, you never ever finish something that you don't start. For so many people, it's the start that stops them. God will give you a vision. He'll give you a burden. He'll give you a deo honuma. You can sense, I'm supposed to start this. What is it that you're supposed to start? How do you start something big? Well, you start small. You can think big, but be willing to start small, because whoever's faithful with a little, God will trust with a lot. So what do? You start small, then you take the next step. You do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you'll reap a harvest if you do not give up. The Lord directs our steps. The theme is not called divine destination, because we never ever arrive. We're always following Jesus step by step. Over the last 4 weeks, there's one big thought that you'll take away that will be with you forever. What is the big thought God has given you in the last 4 weeks that will drive you, lead you, and empower you toward your divine direction?